determines to a large extent what is the relationship that young people have within the, or where they are, what is the political space they occupy within the socio-political and socio-economic framework of the country. It is not a shopping list. Okay? And so, from a Caribbean standpoint, in the 19th century, there was this major event in the Caribbean. The economies of many of those islands were slave economies. Okay, the slave trade was vibrant. There was a policy, it was not written, but the policy was that young people was cheap labor for the plantations. In the post-slavery period, came indentureship. The economy remained the same, that young people, the policy at the time, the economic, the youth policy, although it was not written, was that young people should remain largely uneducated, cheap labor for the plantations. And so there was the African descent and the Indian descent that came through indentureship. And so that was the policy. The policy was cheap labor, young people provided cheap labor for the economic system that existed in those times. And so it comes back to the point that policy is a political instrument. After years after the post-emancipation period, the Caribbean revolted. The UK government at that time sent a commission called the Wine Commission to investigate the causes and the reasons for the riots in the Caribbean and to look at results. The Wine Commission recognized and confirmed that the policy was discriminatory to young people. It established the fact that young people were largely uneducated and the source of cheap labor, and what they did, they recommended some social welfare measures to improve the conditions of young people in the Caribbean. That became the policy. In 1945, when young people met in London and they established the World Federation of Democratic Youth, was perhaps the first international call for youth policies. Okay, and the youth policies were very progressive, built around young people participating in the struggle for global peace and for unity among the people and self-determination. That was followed in 1949, when the World Assembly of Youth was established, and again they called for youth policies. And to make the point that from a Caribbean perspective, following on those two global events, from the 1960s, youth policy is not new to us. From the 1960s, there was the first wave of youth policies in the Caribbean. When you see some of them, maybe in 3 or 4 pages, they were in typewriter, but not computer, legal typewriter thing. They were youth policies in the Caribbean. Subsequently, when the emergence of the movement for independence and self-determination, we got a second wave of youth policies that came in that spoke about establishing ministries of youth, because before they didn't have ministries of youth. They talk about establishing ministries of youth. They talk about trying to get young people to participate in national development. What forced that was the fact that young people had actively participated in the mass political movements of those years, in terms of calling for national liberation, calling for independence. So it forced those governments to try and say, okay, let us get young people involved in an organized way, so that again, their policy was a political instrument. The instrument was to kind of manage young people's radicalism, so that it did not upset the status quo. So going forward, and which is what I think we are trying to do here, going forward from that situation, we must be clear what are the philosophical principles of those policies that we established.
Hallelujah.
What are those philosophical principles? Are we building policies that are going to just ensure young people remain controlled, that young people remain pawns to be used by political processes, marginalized by economic systems? Is that what we're talking about? Or are we talking about putting young people at the vanguard, at the cutting edge of change, letting them lead the change? Because there are two things that you cannot take away from young people, and we keep putting it down, but we need to put at the center of the development in our society. It is what we see as the restlessness of young people, one, and two, the propensity for risk-taking. So that if our societies are now in a state of morass, a state of disorganization, the only grouping that can seriously take us forward are young people because of their propensity to take risks. But we have to invest that risk-taking propensity into positive things. Otherwise, the agents of criminality and whatnot are going to use it and use it effectively, as we have seen in terms of the proliferation of the drug trade and those kinds of areas. So that the strategy, public policy, again, we hear a lot of things about, well, our policies must talk about youth and drugs, youth and health, youth and crime, and youth and this and youth and that. People we still talking about. Because the issues we talk about, none of those issues are youth issues. These are development challenges of societies. But of course, the research will show they impact young people disproportionately. What we should be focusing upon is how do we position young people at the center of the development of our society. This is what the policy should be about. So essentially, I could use an example really this emerging policy. Now, there are usually 4 broad areas that you need to look at. All of the concerns that you raise. 1, how do you integrate young people into the economic development of the society? 2, how do you put young people at the center of the political and governance processes in the country? 3, how do you build resilience within the communities, within young people, so that they can better manage the societal challenges of crime and all of those HIV and now Ebola and all those things that are affecting us. Okay? And the 4th one is how are you going to develop a professional, value-based youth development culture and practice in your society. This is essentially what your policy should be speaking about. Of course, with a number of little recommendations that is going to actually speak about. The other point that must be made is that the young people are the only ones, if we use a scale, let's say a scale from 1% or 0% to 100%, young people are the only ones who will ever be 100% in need of and in support of a policy. Governments will go to a certain extent, they will be allied with the young people to a certain extent, and sorry, Minister, the politician will go a certain extent to the young person, but there's a point at which the politician, unless he or she of a different type, will part ways. Because there will be a point where the youth political interest, the not partisan, the youth political and economic interest will collide with the interests of other sectoral groups. So the private sector will go to a certain extent with the young people, but at a certain point they will have to go separate ways. The only constant in terms of ensuring policy remains and policy evolves and is progressive are the young people. And so as we talk about going forward in terms of policies, there are a couple of things we need to recognize. We need to talk about examine what are the power relationships in our societies. We need to analyze the power relationships. Don't put policies and hoping that everybody is supporting it, we don't need very first law. What are the power relationships and how do we strategize to ensure that young people are able to manage those power relationships and to find the political space? Secondly, it makes no sense investing everything in developing the policy, but you are not strengthening the capacity of the young people and the networks and the organizations to continue to advocate for the implementation of the policy, to continue to participate in the implementation of the policy, and to continue to evaluate and monitor what is happening. So the investment in the policy must be supported by an equal investment in ensuring that there are vibrant youth networks, youth councils, whatever you call it, in that environment. Okay? The other one is that we have to be careful. There is something that I have referred to, without any offense to any of the agencies. There is a thing that we have to be careful as people in agencies. Yeah? Individually, we may be very supportive of young people and development. Yeah? But there is a thing, what I refer to as the dictatorship of international agencies. We have to be careful. I believe those agencies should work with young people, help build the capacity, let young people determine the agenda, and you support the young people's agenda. The other way around, which I sense where the international development agents and regional ones as well are setting the agenda and they try to get you to validate the agenda. Let us get away from that. So at the end of the day, to conclude, the youth policy going forward must not be a shopping list or a prescription to address youth problems. You don't have that youth problem. It is an instrument of empowerment, it's a political instrument. And therefore, we also have to develop the mechanisms to measure at whatever point we want to determine whether empowerment is taking place. Thank you.